you check the children? Show a little match sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Horror Show. I'm Cecil, Laird, and I'm here to review the brand new or relatively recently released Hellboy, the Crooked Man. So this is an interesting movie because it was getting a lot of crap before its release, because a lot of people wanted, a third Ron Perlman, Guillermo del Toro Hellboy movie, but that's proved to be very too expensive for studios to touch, according to Guillermo del Toro. So that never happened, and then they rebooted it in like 2018 or 2019 with David Harbour from Stranger Things playing Hellboy, and that one didn't do very well, although there was one particularly cool scene when a bunch of giant demons emerge from the streets in a town and just start murdering random people in various grotesque ways. Thought that was really cool, honestly, but this one, when people started to see footage of it and pictures of it, they started to like poo-poo it for looking so low budget. And compared to the other ones, it is very low budget. This was released straight to VOD, and it was, a lot of people thought it would go to the theater, but it did not. And it is starring not any particular big star. I think the character or the actor's name is Jack Casey. I'm not sure how to say the last name. It's Kesy. But yeah, my thoughts on it, starting back when we saw the trailer, was that, oh wow, this actually looks a lot more like the comic book Hellboy than the other ones did. So if you've read the comics, you know what Hellboy looks like, and you know how Hellboy acts. And they got part of that right in the other movies, specifically the Guillermo del Toro movies, but really, he's a little too showy in those movies. He's a little too, gruff and action hero-y, whereas in this one, personally, I think they got the characterization of Hellboy the most right. The movie is a very, again, low-budget version of Hellboy, and it's essentially what could be a episode of a Hellboy TV series, just one of his adventures. It's called The Crooked Man because it's based on a comic book storyline that, of course, Mike Mignola, the original creator, wrote. And I believe it was one that the artwork was done by, oh man, I can't believe I'm going to space his name here on camera, but anyway, he unfortunately passed away. And he's a phenomenal artist. Of course, I'm going to space it. Guys, I've been around for too many years. I can't sift through my brain filofax as quickly as I want to. And if you know what a filofax is, you're old like I am. So, anyway, I'm going to try and think of it in the background while I continue to review this. But having watched it, even though I was excited about it from the trailers, having watched it, I enjoyed it well enough. Like, it's not the best movie in the world, but for a Hellboy movie, I think they did a really good job, honestly. I feel like they nailed the atmosphere of the comics. They nailed his characterization from the comics. The effects that we got weren't bad. Like, again, I know that there's some people be like, oh, it was terrible CG. Again, I tend to be a little bit more forgiving when it comes to that. And this, obviously, yes, it's CG, but because I know that there's not a giant spider that's running around, doing anything, let alone moving quickly or anything like that. I know there's not a giant snake that would exit a woman and re-enter her through her mouth and make this kind of grotesque Ouroboros. But the imagery is really cool, whether the effects are perfect or not. And so I appreciated it. And again, I liked the lower budget version of it, where it's just one adventure. Hellboy is just going to this place and trying to figure something out. It's more like an episode of X-Files starring Hellboy and his trusty assistant kind of thing. And I really appreciated it for that. It essentially, I'll read the description to you. It's Hellboy and a rookie BPRD agent in the 1950s are sent to the Appalachians, where they discover a remote community dominated by witches and led by the sinister local demon, the Crooked Man. And so, yeah, I mean, that is the long and short of it, and he's trying to investigate, figure out who the Crooked Man is, what the Crooked Man is, where the Crooked Man is, and he gets hung up by witches along the way, and it's pretty entertaining for what it is. It's not hugely so that it is right homeable, you know, where everyone needs to go out and purchase it, because it wasn't even available for rent for the first month. It was briefly on one service, and then they stopped. You could only buy it for $20 for about the first month. So I waited, and finally it became available to rent, and that's when I gave it a try. And I think it's well worth the $6.99 or $5.99 or whatever it cost me to rent it. I had a good time with it. So acting-wise, I feel like they did a good job as well. I didn't not like anyone in the whole movie. I enjoyed everyone. No one took me out of it. Everyone played their role correctly. Yes, some of them were, a little more over the top than others, but I feel like it was because it's what the characters were called for. They were just doing their thing, and it was choices by the actors, and I didn't bump into any of the choices that were made. So the story, getting into that, because I did skip over it after the description, I feel like the story is just a little bit on the uninteresting side, or it wasn't riveting the whole way through. It's kind of basic. That's why it feels more like an episode of a TV show than a full-on film that you'd get in the theater. But again, I'm not going to really hold that much against it, because I enjoyed it for what it was, knowing what it was probably going to be going into it. So I didn't have lofty expectations that were not met. I appreciated what we got. So sticking with the filmmaking of it, I feel like it was done well. I don't think there was a couple of interesting shots and interesting choices to present the evils throughout the movie, so I appreciated the vision of the director and the cinematographer and how they worked together to make things happen. I think they did a good job. So it was directed by Brian Taylor and written by Kristopher Golden, Mike Mignola, and Brian Taylor. So yeah, it's really not a bad watch, in my opinion. When it comes free to streaming services, or when it comes to streaming services people are already paying for, I imagine it'll get a bigger audience then, because there's too many people poo-pooing it and downplaying, what it is right now for people to really give it a try. But I hope they do eventually, because I had a good enough time with it that I hope they do more with this version of Hellboy. Or at least I hope the next iteration of Hellboy is closer to this, characterization than we got in the other ones. Again, this is not the spectacle that the other ones were, but it definitely works for what it is. So as far as the actual sound goes, the sound design and the score, I feel like those things were both really strong too. The sound design works particularly well because there's some unnerving things. The Crooked Man specifically does a lot of that, neck cracking and unnerving shuffling and kind of things like that are, used to help augment the experience, obviously, and I feel like all of that was done pretty well. Again, I can't speak specifically to what the score, like any particular moments from the film that the score was, stand out, but I did notice that it matched the mood throughout, so I feel like they did a good job there. And yeah, finally the effects. Obviously, like I said earlier, there's some CG that some people might consider questionable, but I did not have an issue with that. I liked the way the snake looked. I liked the way the spider looked. I liked the way that, the witches and their effects looked. I appreciated, everything that we got. So I didn't, some might say that there's too much CG in it, possibly, that they leaned on it too much because they thought it was the cheaper option, and that may be the case. But I appreciated what we got, it didn't bother me that much. More practical effects definitely would have been appreciated, but that's always the case nowadays. So yeah, I don't think I need to say a whole lot more than that. I think I covered most everything. So if you guys want to give it a try, but you've been on the fence, I would say give it a go, especially if you're, a little bit forgiving about effects, or, if you appreciate that it's a much more low-key story within the Hellboy lore, then I think you'll appreciate it like I did. So thank you guys very much for checking out the review. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel the way that you do. We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, I've been Cecil Laird, and remember, stay scared.